Welcome to the Peep Show podcast.
Your glance at sex and social justice.
With Jesse and PJ Sage. Welcome back to another episode of the Peep Show podcast. This week we have the pleasure of speaking to Andy. Andy is the owner of the Growth Arc, a trauma-informed, sex-positive relationship and sexuality coaching program, which she started in 2007 to help people be more honest with themselves and in all of their relationships. We talked to her about her own path to ethical non-monogamy and how she is drawing on these experiences to help others. It is the 35th episode of the podcast. We are moving right along. That's a nice round number.
Is 35 a round number?
No, actually, I guess it's not a round. Well, I don't know. It depends on what you mean by that.
Yeah, I don't actually even know what I mean.
It's not an even number, but I don't know. 5s and 10s seem like round numbers to me. Okay, it's not a round number, but it seems like a big number to me.
Yeah, well, one way or another, it feels significant. I agree.
Yeah.
It's hard to believe. I mean, we're almost coming up on AVN again. And gosh, this time last year, we were just figuring out how to do this whole podcasting thing. And now we have 35 episodes under our belt.
Yeah, and bringing up AVN, I actually want to follow up on something that we were talking about last week. We've had our GoFundMe going for a week, and on GoFundMe, we raised $400, and we had a private donation of $150, so we have earned $550 towards our trip.
That means we're more than halfway there.
I know. It's really exciting. So we so appreciate everybody's support in the last week for the podcast. It really, really means a lot to us. And even if it's just $5 or $10, it means a lot to us that you guys support the show and are interested in seeing us, do the sort of coverage that we want to do. So thank you. Thank you for everybody who participated in it. It's still up and going, so you can check out our Peep Show podcast GoFundMe.
You all are awesome Peep Show podcast heroes.
Yeah, Peep Show podcast heroes.
No, but seriously, AVN's a really important opportunity for us to make connections with people in and around the adult industries. And last year we made a ton of contacts there, which led to interviews that you got to hear throughout the year. So, it's not like just a fancy Vegas vacation. It really is. You get so many people in one place for 1 week. It's also important because we can bring you ground level coverage of both workers and fans' experiences. That's one of the really powerful things I think we can do as a podcast. And we just really want to get out there and bring you some of that floor audio of how people are experiencing this big event in the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. We're really excited to talk to Andy today about polyamory because it's not something that we've covered enough on the podcast.
Which is kind of crazy. I'm surprised that we haven't talked about it more.
Before we do that, we thought that for the news segment, we would talk about the pushback against Ashley Judd by the sex work community this past week. I actually don't know that much about Ashley Judd. I'm not much of a Hollywood person who cares that much about celebrities.
I mean, I actually don't know all that much either. I think she was in those Insurgent movies and the recent episodes of Twin Peaks. But
is there recent episodes of Twin Peaks? When did that show end?
Oh, I mean, ages ago, but I think there was there's a revival thing.
Oh, I didn't even know that.
But I mean, most importantly, what I do know is that she got her acting start on Star Trek The Next Generation as one of the minor ensign characters.
Does that elevate her in your mind a little bit?
It would, if, as much as it breaks my heart to criticize a former Star Trek cast member.
You might have to do it.
I might have to do it given the circumstances.
These circumstances must be dire then. That's all I have to say. Okay, so the story is that in addition to Ashley Judd's acting career, she also has a activism career. And she's fairly well known for that, for doing activism work on behalf of women and girls. So she's become increasingly involved with a group called Demand Abolition, which is a anti-sex work activism group that is working to abolish the sex trades. One of the things that she said that got a lot of sex workers on sex work Twitter and throughout our communities really upset is that she equated sex work to the buying and selling of girls' and women's orifices, which I can't even imagine how anyone could think that, particularly somebody that's so concerned about the objectification of women.
Well, right. That's exactly it. It is like the most objectifying thing you could say.
Yeah, I mean, it just flattens sex workers to nothing but orifices and erases all of the other labor that they do.
Right.
She's like assuming that that's all that sex workers do are just holes for penetration and doesn't take into consideration the relationship building and the marketing and the bookings and the screenings and the administrative work and the emotional labor and so many things.
I mean, this is why people are so pissed. It's so demeaning.
Yeah, and so there was a meeting on December 6th during an event at the Wing, members only women's co-working space, and Judd was there being interviewed by the New York Times. And a sex worker that goes by SX Noir was there. Actually, there was a lot of sex workers there that were protesting it, but she stood up in this meeting and told Judd that she needed to listen to sex workers and asked her if she would be willing to sit down and have a conversation with sex workers about their jobs and their experiences, pointing out that Ashley Judd is not in a position to speak authoritatively about sex workers and their experiences.
Right. Experiences that she's never had.
Right. And Ashley Judd responded well to SX Noir and said something, responded well. I mean, that is in air quotes. What she said to her is, I'm on your side. I'm not with the pimps, brothels, and pornographers, which also made me a little bit crazy. I don't even know who she thinks the pornographers are. I mean, so many sex workers are producing their own pornography. It just is further indicative of the fact that she doesn't understand the industry that we work in. And
or that she doesn't believe that sex workers have any agency. Sex work is a thing that happened to sex workers in her mind, right?
Right.
And this is, again, part of the critique that came up in her later statement that she issued, where she used the phrase prostituted women, which is like some real late 70s, 80s kind of anti-sex work rhetoric that she's reviving.
Well, yeah, she even says that you cannot consent to your own exploitation. So her idea is that every single person who's a sex worker is exploited. And when they say, no, I actually consented to my work, she's like, no, basically you're living in false consciousness. You can't consent to your own exploitation.
Right. So everything you say about your own experience is a lie. I mean, that's what she's telling sex workers, is that you're deluded, you're lying, and I'm here to rescue you.
Yeah.
And show you how to be a real woman.
Even though you didn't ask to be rescued, even though you don't want my help, even though you're saying that your life and your experience is not what I'm claiming it to be.
No, but that use of the language prostituted women, you know, it is this vintage 1980s phrase. I thought it was interesting on Twitter to see some of the backlash where sex workers were saying, like, outright, this is a slur. We see this as a slur. You are saying that, you know, we are people who can't make decisions for ourselves, people who have no agency, and we take this phrase to be a slur.
Right. She also said things that were extraordinarily classist, I thought, which is one of the things that she said is that the inside of a woman's body is not a workplace. She's not recognizing that so many people use their bodies for their labor in various different ways.
And that phrase was totally lifted from Julie Bindel from that Guardian piece.
Oh, yeah.
She wrote back in April. You know, which isn't to say that we shouldn't read things and use them to support our arguments. But she's clearly invested in a certain limited anti-sex work canon, and her perspective and argumentation is dwelling on and reflecting that. And one of the things about that body of literature is that it's historically really cherry-picked examples and systematically ignored sex workers' voices. And not only that, but suggested things like sex workers are male identified or even gender traders, right?
Right. And that actually comes to the last point that I want to make about all of this is that one of the things that she said is when men purchase sexual access to women's bodies, his female colleagues and loved ones become collateral damage. And that points to one of the main cruxes of this anti-sex work feminist position, which is that it's not just about protecting sex workers or saving sex workers or playing like hero to sex workers.
Or even primarily about
No,
that.
it comes out of their own like fear. Fear of sex workers and fear that they're somehow going to corrupt their men.
This isn't something you have to read into it. I mean, if you go back to the sources, if you go back to people like Catherine McKinnon or Andrea Dworkin, I mean, they were saying outright, our goal is to promote the interest of a supposed universal womanhood, right? The idea that all women have a shared set of interests and a shared set of experiences.
Right.
But we know damn well that in the 90s, a lot of particularly Black feminists heavily criticized this idea that there was a universal set of experiences that defined womanhood, and suggested that what they defined as women's experience was really the experience of a specific privileged group of affluent white women.
Right. Yeah.
And that for working class women, for Black women, for other people, the experiences that they described just didn't resonate, right?
Right. Mm-hmm.
And that even within these categories, women have distinct experiences. Women are individuals. And guess what? Some women are queer. Some women are trans. Mm-hmm. And those women also matter too.
Right.
And these are things that, like, that position aggressively refused to acknowledge.
Yeah. I don't have much interest in Ashley Judd. What I do want to say, and why I did bring this up, is that I want to reiterate again that people who work outside of the sex industry really shouldn't be pontificating about what it is that should happen to the sex industry without listening to the voices of the people who are actually doing the work. So that is like a mantra that we keep saying over and over again, but that's the upshot of this. On that note, we want to move on to our interview with Andy, who's going to talk to us about both sex work and polyamory from a position of a non-monogamous sex worker. So.
Yay.
Yay. One of the things that I do want to say before we start the interview with Andy is just in terms of a trigger warning, we do have a discussion of her past, which includes childhood sexual trauma. And while it's not fairly explicit, I just wanted to say that before we get started.
All right. Okay. Let's get to it.
All right. We are here today with Andy, who is the owner and coach at The Growth Arc. She is a mother, an educator, a sex worker, and a human. She started The Growth Arc in 2017, hoping to help humans work to be more honest with themselves and in all of their relationships. The Growth Arc is a trauma-informed, sex-positive relationship and sexuality education-based coaching program. Andy works with individuals, couples, and groups through conversation and individualized educational programming to help find and communicate their sexual and relationship desires. So thanks so much for talking to us today, Andy.
Well, hello. You're so welcome.
We are excited to talk to you. We've talked a little bit about relationships and a little bit about polyamory on the show, but not as much as we wanted to. So we're excited to talk to you about how you integrate that into your coaching practices. So tell us a little bit about the work that you're doing with the Growth Arc.
Well, the Growth Arc is something that I had come to me while I was in my graduate program. I found out about polyamory, and we can get into that a little bit more, and then realized there wasn't a lot of resources out there for people who were wanting to learn more about it. And so I decided to switch my major and create a program so that I could do that in my community.
What did you switch your major to and from?
I was at St. Mary's University here in the Twin Cities, and I was in the educational leadership program. I've been teaching 7 through 12 English for the last 8 years, and I thought I wanted to be a principal. So I was starting that track, and halfway through my master's program, I read The Ethical Slut, and oh my God. And there's like 1,000 stories about this time in my life. So I don't want to waste too much time on a lot of the personal stuff now, unless you want to. But then I decided to switch my major to the Human Development Program. St. Mary's has a Build Your Own Master's program. That's really awesome.
Oh, interesting.
I was able to get a little golden ticket pass to take master's classes and other programs. And I built my own coaching and human anthropology track. So I graduated with my master's in human development from St. Mary's.
Wow, that's awesome. So tell us about reading The Ethical Slut and what that ignited in you.
Well,
I was trying to think of a better word.
That's a good word. I like that.
We like all the personal stories. So.
Okay, cool. I was like in the shower right before this after my cat was throwing up. And like, how much of this are they going to have to do like a 3-part series of my story? So I was teaching full time in my master's program and was still in a very unethical part of my life and had engaged in my first actual affair. Before that, I was acting out on a lot of sexual trauma where I was seeking attention in a way that I was taught from childhood through sex. So I was like seeking validation and self-esteem boosters. So sleeping around behind my husband's back unethically, but never engaged in any actual affairs because I was weirdly ethical around entering these other relationships. I would start with, I am never leaving this. This is what I'm doing. This is where I am. You can engage in this with me or not.
Regarding your marriage?
Yeah, like I was really ethical with these other people, protecting my life a little bit.
Yeah.
Like, this is where you are. I would create strict boundaries, but I knew I was not being totally honest, obviously, with everybody else and was living a crazy second life behind everybody's back.
Yeah.
Balancing all of that. And then I entered my first actual affair where I was very much committed to this other person and I was not cheating anymore. And because of a little bit of what I explain as like, you know how people are like, oh, I don't cheat on this person, so they must be the one. They're the ones who get me to not do this thing. So I am monogamous. Like, this is who I'm supposed to be with, kind of soulmate.
Yeah.
I kind of attribute that to monogamous mindset where like you find your soulmate and that's the one person you're supposed to change everything for.
Yeah. And then you like never have a desire for anyone else again. And if you do, that means you're not in love or something like that.
Yeah. Yeah. So I was succumbing to that a little bit, but was also being mentally and physically abused by this man. So I think that I was giving him a lot more credit than was worth because it was around that same time that I was in therapy. I've been on one-on-one therapy with my amazing therapist, Ben. I don't know if that's ethical, but I'm going to talk about him because he's the best. I had been in therapy with him for the last year and a half to try to stop this behavior that I was doing. I knew it was wrong and I didn't like it. I was really, really suicidal, but I kept that from everybody as well because I'm like super gregarious when you're around me. Like I'm smiling all the time and people like to be around me. And I like was able to keep that mask going.
Yes, we had dinner with you and that's so true.
And I mean, that's truly and honestly my human nature. That's me. But I was also having all this other craziness happening. And that same time that I was entered in this first affair, I realized where my root of my sexual trauma came from. I was doing EMDR with him and I was talking through all this trauma that happened after my original root.
Sorry, what's EMDR? The interweb says it's eye movement desensitization and reprocessing.
Yes, nice, yes. You started with lights blinking back and forth, and it's supposed to trigger both sides of your brain, and you talk through your trauma. I know it's different for everybody, but then they've since changed to you hold vibrating things in each hand, and it vibrates right, left, right, left, right, left. And you just talk.
You also like look in different directions, right?
Yep. So you can do either. I did the vibrating hands one.
Wow, you guys know this whole thing I don't know anything about.
Yeah, I've had some other friends who had amazing results with that, working through trauma that they couldn't work through in other ways.
Yeah, it was amazing.
Wow, like this is totally new to me. Sorry, I'm geeking out.
It's amazing. And like all different, everybody has a different therapy practice or way that works for them. But I know a lot of people also that have had a lot of success with it. Yeah, so I was doing that. And I finally got through all the things that I thought were my original traumas. And my therapist was like, what else is there, Andrea? And I started to explain trauma with my stepbrother that started when I was about 11. And I never had thought that that was trauma. I didn't really realize that what was happening to me was bad.
Yeah.
He would only seek me at night. It was secretive. Sorry, this is like super trigger warning.
No, it's okay.
And would only give me attention if it was in a sexual way, or if I looked really pretty, or if I was being sexualized by him, I was getting attention from him. And I was like wanting his attention because he's like 4 years older than me. And he didn't start out as my stepbrother. My mom worked for his dad forever. So he was just kind of like a hot older kid in the neighborhood, And I was like, oh my God, like a 12-year-old with like a freshman.
Right.
You would think like, oh my God, this hot older guy that my mom works with. But then he just became my stepbrother and then it became bad. And still he was a lot older than me developmentally and all that. I was acting out in that way through all my 20s. Still, if I felt bad about myself, my self-esteem, or if I didn't feel like wanted, I was very flirtatious with people and I would get that attention. And then I didn't know how to stop. So then I would sleep with people. And it would, that was the pattern that I was taught. And I didn't realize that that was happening. And so I was with my therapist, Ben, he's the best. And we finally unlocked that at that same exact time that I was entering that relationship where I thought that like I was cured by him because I was supposed to be monogamous with him. I was giving him a lot more credit than what was due in the work that I was doing in therapy at this time.
Yeah.
Because it was also at that time that I entered group therapy for like rape survivors here in the Twin Cities. It wasn't a dry one. So that was like also really like intense to be around. But it was really important for me to be around these other women and talk with them about their trauma. So I was doing all that work and in this relationship and in my master's program. And then I was at one of those groups and I saw The Ethical Slut across the room that we were in. And I was like, what is that book? Because I like, I kind of like being a slut, but I don't like being unethical. So, so I went and bought it right away and read it and just started bawling because I was like, holy shit. Because some of the people I was entering these unethical relationships with, I really did love. I loved them, but did not want to engage further than what we had established and what I had set up. And I remember laying with one of my previous lovers and he asked me like what my ideal situation would be. And I was like, well, I wish I was a queen in a castle and I had many wings and all my lovers lived there. And I could like go to their wings if I wanted to see them, but we would have a family room and everybody would get along. And I didn't know like what I was describing was essentially what a lot of people for a long time historically and still today have been doing in polyamory.
Right.
I mean, not always living in castles, but being
So that would be nice.
That's the fantastical version of it, right?
So when I read Ethical Slut, I was like, holy shit, I need this because I have been lying to my then husband. He's an amazing man. We have a great relationship still, and that's another story we can get into. And was just like, this is something I can do, and I've been lying forever, and I need this way to live to stop this pattern that my stepbrother taught me about being secretive.
Yeah.
And this is amazing because then I can love everybody that I want to love. And holy shit, this way of communicating is so much better for the world than what is happening right now. These tools need to be out here. So I switched my master's program.
That's amazing. Yeah. And also, I think the amazing thing about it is that then your work springs out of your own personal history and your story. And
like your personal investment in these issues.
yeah.
Yeah. It's been an amazing ride.
It seems like what you've talked about up until this point is the way in which like being in a program and learning and being in therapy and being in these groups help to heal you. But now you're also working to provide those sort of services for other people. So what has that transition look like, and what does your practice look like now?
Yeah, so that's a good question. I'm just like looking at all my notes, like, where do I start? I got done with that program, and like I said, I'd been working in education, and I know how much education can transform people. And I love bringing people to their own conclusions. So I really wanted to start a program where it wasn't therapy, because I'm not a therapist. I did not go through and get a license for that. I don't have any awesome letters behind my name, and I don't try to pretend to be a therapist.
Yeah.
I wanted to build an educational program that would help people, like I said, come to their own conclusions. I wanted them to have an individualized program where I would teach them things, help them see their truths, and then find their own path. Because I find a lot of healing in education,
Yeah.
Being able to unlearn ways that you've been taught to live and find your own path, to me, is very healing.
I very much resonate with that.
Yeah, it's just like so important for me to like have veils unlifted for my students that I was working with when I was in K-12 and now with my own coaching people. It's been really awesome to sit with my clients and question their thinking, like have them talk to me like, well, why do you think that?
Yeah.
Where does that come from? And so I do use a lot of one-on-one talking therapy practices. We do a lot of like narrative therapy style things, which I learned in my master's program because I got to take a bunch of therapy courses. And then I go back and I go through my resources and I create homework for my clients because I can't stop that teaching part. So I like send articles and I'm like, this is something I heard you say. This is something that I see in your talking pattern or in how you're viewing things. And I want you to like write these journal prompts or.
This is so funny because I also have taught almost my whole life and I work as a phone sex operator, which is very dialogical. And I do the same thing that you do. I'm like, wow, you said this. And I think that what you're trying to say about what you're looking for in a relationship is X, Y, and Z. And have you thought about it this way? And I think I can't help but do that because of my training.
Absolutely.
And my other career as a teacher. And it kind of just bleeds out like that.
Yeah. And it's been so fun because, like I said, and as you agreed with, and of course you would, because we're both trained in that way. It's like so fun to be a teacher and watch people figure it out finally, the light bulb literally come on and you're like, holy shit.
And you can learn so much just from telling your own story and from having somebody listen to it in a way that other people don't. And then you can connect dots that you wouldn't have thought about before.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like a veil unlifting, I think. I like that metaphor.
And then like as we were talking about earlier, my story is fun to connect to with my coaching because when I catch people in unethical behavior, I not very proudly was very successfully unethical. So I can see it very quickly and in my clients and can kind of catch that. So that's been fun to connect that as well. And it's been really good to be completely authentic lately because it's healing for me more. And then it's like my clients I feel like they really appreciate that in me.
What are you catching? Just patterns of behavior or like?
Absolutely. Yeah. Mostly patterns of behavior. 2 sessions and I'll notice like, this is something I see you keep hiding or omitting from what you're telling your partner when you talk. Or why do you feel like you have to text that person only when you're at work? Tell me about that. Does that mean you and your partner haven't talked through your communication boundaries? And have you completely been honest about when you're talking to these other people? I've been able to catch some of that possibly boundary breaking behavior.
So let's take a step back for a second. So one of the things that we're talking about is, ethical non-monogamy or polyamory, but let's just take a step back and talk about what polyamory is and how different people practice it and why this was something that was more appealing to you or what you think the positives of it are for you or your clients.
So one thing that I found really crazy in my research and something that's pretty well known in the polyam world is that nobody can like really fully accept one definition.
Yeah.
That's a different one. So the one that I've really, really built my practices in myself and used as a coaching basis is polyamory is the desire and practice of having more than one intimate relationship at a time with full knowledge and consent by everyone involved.
Mm-hmm.
I really like this one because I really love the full knowledge and consent because it really, really pushes transparent honesty.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's the definition that I use when I'm talking about this, which is something that's weird about myself, though, is I don't identify as polyamorous. My preference is to identify as non-monogamous.
Yeah. Why is that?
What are the differences for you? Like, how do you differentiate those two things?
I use I see non-monogamous as a big umbrella. And I actually have a really funny picture of an umbrella that I created that I should send to you guys.
Oh, yeah, definitely. We'll put it on we'll link it to the episode.
I'm naked though, but I think I might have sensed it properly. But I see that non-monogamy is a big umbrella. So I have non-monogamy on the umbrella, and I put a bunch of strings with all the different words that for me and for lots of other experts in the world and people that practice see falling under non-monogamy. So something like swinging is there. Sex work is under non-monogamy. Polygamy and polyandry are both under non-monogamy.
Yeah.
Anything that would fall under that is there. And I like to identify as non-monogamous. I see non-monogamy as a mindset and not like a way to live or not like a relationship structure.
Yeah.
A lot of
like
the
a specific set of practices or something.
Yeah, because there's just so much stuff that falls under that. And polyamory falls under non-monogamy. I personally don't identify always. Like I will sometimes like slip and use both non-monogamous and polyamorous, but I put on my profiles non-monogamous. I don't use polyamory because unfortunately there's been too many stories in my local community and then in the community at large of people using the word polyamory in like an unethical way because it's like a buzzword. And I've heard too many stories where it's like, well, I'm polyamorous, so you just have to deal with my unethical behavior. Or people in the Twin Cities have too many examples of local humans that use that word and then are cheating on their partners and being unethical. And so when they hear the word polyamorous, they think of those people. I didn't want to identify with them.
I've thought a lot about this because I feel like I've had a similar impulse to be more interested in identifying as non-monogamous than as polyamorous. But part of my reason for that is that at least like where we are in Pittsburgh, there's a really large poly community, but it seems to me like there's a lot of very rigid notions within those communities of what that means and how people ought to practice polyamory, but
like a lot of policing.
It's really dogmatic in ways that I'm not comfortable with, because non-monogamy for me is more like people ought to be able to practice their relationships and have sex in ways that are meaningful to them and be open and honest about it. But it doesn't mean that these particular sorts of relationship structures are better than these particular sorts of relationship structures. And I see a lot of that in poly communities.
Well, I think using a kind of broader, looser term implies that the way you practice these things gets negotiated more in specific individual relationships rather than being a set of rules that you bring into a relationship before you even meet.
Yeah, totally. We have that same problem here in the Twin Cities, here in Minnesota. There is like very, very rigid or higher than thou behavior around some polyamorous communities that I also didn't want to identify with. But that's not saying that the MN Poly meetup group also saved my life in that time.
Right.
Yeah.
And they were there for me. And so I will always be there to fight for their right to have their very rigid ways of thinking, some of them, but a lot of them are very open-minded and have seriously helped me through so much. But I do have a couple other friends in town that are licensed sex therapists and are couples therapists that don't send their clients to some of the meetups that are already here because of that behavior. They've had their clients come back with terrible stories of some of those groups telling them that they were practicing wrong or doing something different. Which I don't want to identify with, which is why I'm starting my own, starting in January on Monday nights here in the Twin Cities.
Oh, neat. So you're starting like a meetup group?
I am. I'm going to try to set up my own communication and relationship night on Mondays here. It's going to be at Common Roots.
Okay.
But I can send you guys more information to put up there maybe with this episode.
Yeah, that sounds great.
I identify with a lot of things that the polyamorous community does do, but I find myself, like you were saying, liking non-monogamy because my relationship with my sex work clients is different than my relationship with my tertiary lovers, which is different with my people that I, enter into swinging type relationships with and people that are my primary partners and all of that.
Yeah, right.
No, I totally feel you. And actually, that also raises another element, which is it is tough because I think we're so strongly identified with the sex work community and with sex work identities. And honestly, there is some significant whorephobia that exists in certain poly communities and certain swinging communities, and that's something that I really struggle with, or certainly makes me feel very alienated when I hear the way that certain people talk about sex work.
Yeah, that is also very, very true here. I think it's, community at large in the poly world and the swinging world and in general. I think just in general, the whorephobia in the world is really bad.
Yeah, it's like really pervasive.
But it is very, very interesting when you get to a new community that you think is going to be way more open-minded to find their very rigid ways to pop up in different areas.
And I should say, like you, I mean, there are also lots of really great people I've experienced in any of those communities. You have some bad experiences. And I think often I'm frustrated when like certain bad behaviors are tolerated, but that's not to say that everybody in the community is like whorephobic or something. I mean, there are lots of poly people who are like really great allies too.
Oh, right. Absolutely. I always hate that we kind of have to give that caveat of like, I know it's not all, guys, because we just assume that I'm intelligent enough to know that it's not all and I don't have to give that caveat. Yeah, no, I totally agree. Like I found a lot of my allies here are self-identifying polyamorous sex workers.
Yeah.
Very, very open-minded. But there's still too many sad stories of people being really nasty, and it's not good.
Yeah. So one of the things that you were saying prior to us starting the recording was that identifying in your practice as a sex worker as well has become really important to you. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Oh, yeah. I find myself needing to be able to live, to be completely authentic with everybody because I was living such a secretive lifestyle before. So
Mm.
just in general, telling my clients that I do that or asking people how they find me, because I'm open online about all of this right now.
Yeah.
If they don't know that, like disclosing all of that to them before they start working with me is super important because I lived in fear of hiding parts of myself for so long. So that's
Yeah.
like in general, that's important to me. Starting to actually do sex work is something that's very new to me. And it's very important in my practice because I do, as a coach, with couples, really highly recommend hiring out sex workers to break down some boundaries of owning sex with your partner and or using that as a way to get through some of the sticky conversations that can be really hard.
What do you think the advantages of hiring sex workers for that is as opposed to just people within the poly community?
Yeah, that's really interesting.
I think that if you hire out a sex worker, there is an immediate boundary there because it's a transaction. It's not
Mm-hmm.
like you're not thinking that you're owning this other person's time or anything other than the time that you're with that person. So it also takes away the conversations around like flirting with that person and how often you're going to be talking to that person and what the relationship with this person will look like afterwards.
Right.
It's just like 2 hours and done. And then I can work through my clients. How did that 2 hours go? What did that time physically feel like?
Right.
And it's just like compartmentalizing, working through unlearning about like ownership of your partner and like the physical sex part for some reason is like easiest to work through first because there's all this like, ooh, we're gonna have a threesome, ways that the monogamous thinking world sees as being okay but still sees that as being monogamous. That's
Yeah.
totally non-monogamous thinking.
Can you talk a little bit more about that idea of ownership and what you mean by that?
Well, right now, the way the world views sex is it's like sex with your partner is yours and like their body is yours because they're your partner. And so there's a lot of ownership around people's sex, even with like masturbation. Like I've had so many friends actually or people in my life talk about how they get jealous of their partner masturbating because they want to own like their pleasure or something. It's kind of weird. I don't know.
That's weird to me.
That's really interesting, though it's not all that weird to me growing up with mountains of Catholic guilt.
Oh, absolutely.
There's something vaguely comprehensible to me about that, but it's really interesting to hear you say it, frame it out like that.
Well, I mean, this is also why I was like in the shower, like this is going to be like a 3-part series. Because my ideas on like sex and ownership go back to like where I started learning in human anthropology of relationships, like in my master's program, because monogamy is dated back to when humans decided to start colonizing the world, when we started putting fences up and owning the land. And then we started owning our partners' wombs. And then we started owning everything about our partners.
Right.
All around like kind of the same time. And it's just this like it's like super rooted in like ownership and control for me. And so this is something that I want to get a job at a university, just like doing research and writing papers on this kind of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense. There's certainly a lot of ways, particularly women historically, were like treated as literal property. It is interesting because I wonder if like part of that is that as women have gained more equality, like if somehow weirdly, in that case, equality has meant two people treating each other as property rather than deconstructing the notions of romantic relationships as property relationships.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I love all of that. I mean, if you look way back, I'm also, as my sex work identity, I've been learning about sex magic for a very long time. And it's even crazy to look back in that practice where I'm still learning, reading the Magdalene manuscript and how sex, even back when, Christianity was starting with Jesus, looking at sex as something that was healing, and it wasn't this thing that was taboo, and we used to look at it much different. And then
I want to have a whole episode about sex magic.
Oh, yeah, you should. Do not interview me because I feel like I don't know much. I can talk with some people that are really awesome in the community.
Yeah, I don't know that much about it, but for whatever reason, I feel like I should, and that it would like deeply resonate with me in some way.
Absolutely. Go get the Magdalene manuscript by Tom Kenyon.
Okay.
That's where I started, actually. And
because it just is intuitive to me that sex is healing.
Oh, absolutely.
Or can be healing.
Yeah.
I certainly isn't always, and can be used in quite the opposite way. But it's intuitive to me that like opening up your body and being vulnerable is a path to self-knowledge and to healing and to forms of enlightenment.
Totally. I mean, I read Mary Magdalene manuscript right at that same time when I did the switch and read Ethical Slut and did all this. So it's very deeply tied again to how I view non-monogamy as well. Using sex as something that's healing and not letting anybody else control how you view sex or do sex is totally powerful to me. And then just doing that in your relationships as well, and totally freeing yourself from the construct of society's views in general of how I should live my life. It's just been an evolution for me and how I do my coaching.
Yeah.
Are we talking about Mary Magdalene?
Yes.
Like possibly Jesus's wife, and sometimes speculated to be a
disciple?
A disciple? Well, I mean, there was a whole Gnostic gospel dug up, right? That was about her teachings, but also I was going to say a prostitute, right?
Yep, absolutely, 100%. So again, that is also why I want to identify as a sex worker and a coach, because like I see that as so powerful.
Yeah.
She was healing and she was a disciple as far as I'm concerned, and it is something, and it's like all connected, and it doesn't, so I feel like I don't make any sense this morning, but all of this stuff is connected for me for how I run the growth arc and how I'm trying to heal myself and help heal the rest of the world.
Yeah. No, I think that that's a really important work, and it's neat to hear about how you're practicing it. So do you have mostly people come in as couples, or do you have them a lot of people who want to work on their own?
When I first started in the fall of 2017, most of my clients were individuals. A couple of them were part of partnerships and just wanting coaching through some stuff that was non-monogamous like. Things. And then I had a few single women that were considering wanting to explore non-monogamy, but were dating and wanting to know how to like self-identify and explain that to people they were on dates with so that they could create boundaries. But right now, most of my clients are couples.
Yeah, that's really neat. I'm thinking a lot about a lot of my friends that I've had in the past who are still friends of mine, but things that have happened in the past where they've gone as couples to therapy and are swingers or non-monogamous in some way and are having issues in their relationship, but having therapy be really, really unhelpful because they either have to explain to their therapist why they're not monogamous or why that's not the problem, but that they want to work through the issues that they're having, and having that be really difficult because the people that they're going to don't have any expertise in that. So
yeah, or it's assumed the healthy outcome would be
like returning to monogamy or something like that.
As if that would be an indicator that you're healed if you were happy with monogamy or something.
Right. Yeah. I'm just over here shaking my head and like, yeah, no.
But it just seems, I've had so many friends go through this with therapists, with their partners, because they're having some bump in the road, but every relationship has bumps in the roads that most of which, the problem is not monogamy or non-monogamy. It's everyday life. And they want help negotiating those things, but their behavior is pathologized in ways that mean that they can't get anywhere. And so it seems like there would be such a high demand for people who are doing work like you're doing, or for therapists who know something about non-monogamy and don't pathologize it.
That's actually one of the major reasons after reading Ethical Slut that I changed my major, because I was like, people need to be taught about this, and there's not enough experts out there, and I want to help change that. So,
Yeah.
because like I said, the MN Poly meetup group here was so helpful, but I had to teach my awesome therapist about non-monogamy, and I'm lucky that he was open-minded and loving enough to be able to accept me and learn about it. But yeah, there's a lot of horror stories of people not having good experiences. So one of my goals through the growth arc is to also be hired by a therapist for professional development on how to work with couples, and then also get into the health field. Because the monogamous bias or monogamous mindset is something that has been programmed and is like a lens that everybody looks through, that it's like hard for me not to see it. I mean, you can't even watch a nature documentary without them making a romance out of like a male and a female of whatever species you're watching.
No, that's true.
Like the music is like, kind of loving, and the language, the people will be talking about this bird couple is like very monogamously biased, and they're like pushing this idea on, it's in everything. So teaching that, and it's lazy to me when therapists do that. It's just like lazy, it's just, you just need to be monogamous and your problems, like you were saying, will be fixed.
Right.
Or the problem is that you want to be non-monogamous. And that's not their fault. This is what society has been pushing forever.
Right.
So I don't blame them, except when it gets hateful. When it's nasty, then I can be like, well, shame on you. But right now,
But it is in a sense, because if you are a relationship therapist or a relationship coach, it seems like you ought to spend some time thinking about all the different ways in which people construct relationships.
Yeah. But that would mean that the colleges that they've been trained at are teaching that, and they're not.
Right, exactly.
That's absolutely true.
Yeah, somebody has to offer that kind of best practices training, or some narratives, and give people the tools to kind of empathize with these, I guess, non-normative ways of approaching relationships. But without any of that training or tools, it probably is hard for them.
Absolutely. And so that was one of my major goals when I wanted to start the growth arc, to help educate people on this as even a possibility, and then help people unlearn that monogamy is the only way. One of my major goals, I don't think non-monogamy is better than monogamy. I want people to at least know that it isn't the choice. You don't have to do that.
Right.
There are other ways to do relationships. You don't have to just fall into this way of thinking.
Mm-hmm.
And you're not somehow sick or pathological in your relationship just because you happen to practice something that's slightly non-normative.
Right. But I also love helping people see how normal it actually is. And that's something that I loved about the introduction to Ethical Slut. I actually haven't read the 3rd edition yet, but they help you see it in a way of you have more than one friend. You love all your friends, and then you have more than one child. Why is it,
Yeah, I think that the child analogy, especially for parents, is probably one of the better ones, because you love your kids so much, and you can have another one and love them just as much.
Yeah.
I mean, there's some parents who clearly have a favorite,
right?
And maybe those people should be monogamous, and that's cool. But I think there's a lot of other parents who are very capable of loving all their children equally.
Yeah, I mean, I was interviewed by a local publication here in the Twin Cities called the City Pages, and when they were interviewing me about this, I frequently talk about how throughout my childhood, I even had a hard time identifying who my best friend was, because I don't like hierarchical language in general. And I was like, well, all my friends are my best friend. And that was weird for me, or hard for me to do that. I never saw love as something that I could run out of.
Yeah.
I don't see that as oh my gosh, I'm forgetting the economic term. Like it'll run out, like
like expendable or
yeah,
something.
yeah.
Scarce.
Scarcity. That's it. Thanks. Scarcity model. I don't see love as part of that, but we have as a society, again, framed love in that way.
Yeah.
And I mean, like it's the plot line of all soap operas. It's part of all movies or stories of like cheating, like, oh my God, they're going to run out of love for that person. And it's like the biggest thing, but we don't actually run out of it.
Could we talk a little bit more about hierarchical relationships? Because I was actually thinking about this a bit when you were talking about the role sex workers might play in helping people to explore polyamory. One thing I've noticed within poly communities is that there is, for some people, a real resistance or kind of negative feelings about the idea of having hierarchical relationships, having primary relationships, having secondary relationships. This particularly kind of becomes really strongly expressed around unicorn hunting, which is often treated as like a bad word in the poly community. And there's some like assumption that if you're in hierarchical relationships, the person who's like in the secondary relationship is going to be like abused in some way. And I wonder how people in the poly community take to the idea of sex workers helping people to explore poly because of that. Because there's some sense in which employing a sex worker, like you said, it's a very bounded relationship. That's one of its strengths, is that it's not like this equal relationship. It's confined to a brief period of time, and then there's like a nice clean break. But at the same time, I guess it seems a bit in tension with that idea that relationships shouldn't be hierarchicalized.
Yeah, I love that. I love like thinking about sex work as helping with that as well. And I do think that there is still a problem in the polyamorous or non-monogamous community about still owning our partner's time and bodies. So I think that that's also why there's a lot of whorephobia. So I could see that, but I actually haven't spent too much time thinking about that specifically, so I don't want to talk too much on that. But in general, yes, there's so much on the other point, like debate around hierarchy in the polyamorous community. And there are some, like I got run out of a meetup style Facebook group because I was using hierarchical language at the beginning of my ethical opening of my life, and like felt so shamed by them that I was needing to use that. But I needed that. And so I don't think that that's hard. I don't think that it's a bad thing personally.
No, I also think that there's like practical considerations that, I mean,
a lot of times I'm just like, do these people have kids? Like I'm to be honest, like,
I mean, a lot of them do, but like the thing that I think is interesting about that is like when you have a spouse and you're running a household and some kids and a lot of things in that relationship, you can't have the exact same symmetrical relationships with secondary partners because there's less involved. I understand why people are interested in non-hierarchical relationships, and I also understand why hierarchical relationships make sense too. And the only thing that doesn't make sense to me is policing how other people do it.
Absolutely.
I mean, if we lived in a more socialist society where there was a lot of community resources for like raising your family, and we all had, I don't know, more individual stability and independence, that would be like one thing. But in the real society that we live in, I don't know, most people in like families are super dependent on each other.
Right.
We've got like a mortgage to pay. Our kids need to eat. You know, we have a baby who will kill himself through like, you know, a toddler, I should say, through all variety of creative means if one of us is not carefully attending to him at all times. We have a lot of responsibilities to each other. And there honestly is no way that I could have that same level of responsibility with another person or that same degree of interdependence. Like, it just wouldn't be possible. There's not enough time in the day. I would like have to not sleep. But that doesn't necessarily mean that I'm like rigidly monogamous in orientation either. It just
or that like anyone else that you would be in a relationship with would be exploited by that situation.
right.
Yeah. So here, what I like, this is how I view hierarchical language. So I already told you I'm not competitive. Like I don't like to compete in general. So I don't see hierarchy as like a first place, second place, third place style thing.
Right.
I totally agree with you guys that I coach my clients through hierarchy language to schedule your time. It is a logistic thing. It's like, no, this is my person that's closest to me because they are my son's father.
Yeah.
They are my primary. I'm in an emotional relationship with him still. I'm not in a physical relationship with him still, but I still kind of call my ex-husband my primary because he has to be, because he's my son's father.
Yeah.
And he's like one of the most important people to me. But when I describe my own life and I kind of talk with my clients about is like, and I've been yelled at by a potential partner because they saw this as egotistical. I consider myself the sun in an orbit, and then the people that are closest to me getting the most light or warmth are the people that like I have to give more of my time and energy to. And then I have all these other people that orbit my life and are important to me still, but they don't have as much time or energy.
Mm-hmm.
That's very creative.
Yeah.
So, and yeah, that man was like, "Oh, you're the sun. You have to have the whole world revolved around you." Like, no, that's not how it works, actually.
And all the other planets.
Yeah.
No, I think I can see how you can think about that, not necessarily as, I get that because I'm also a mother, and mothers are the center of a lot of people's lives.
Right.
And you only have so much like light to give off. And so I think that sort of language makes sense to me.
Yeah.
And I can see it as not egotistical, just more logistical.
Good. I love you guys.
I just wanted to say, aren't some people poor? Part of me also wonders, with all this logistical stuff, it's easy to talk about having all this flexibility if you're not constrained. But if you're worried about putting gas in the car, that also is like a very real material constraint that limits how much you can put out there. And I feel like there is some class assumption sometimes in the way that people talk about poly, that we have all this individual freedom and flexibility. And I'm like, I don't have that freedom. I got to work and I got to make hard decisions about resources. And that factors in too.
Absolutely. As I was saying earlier, like sometimes I don't see monogamy as bad at all. I think it can be one of the easier, in air quotations, I'm over here, like choices because of time constraints and financial constraints and all that other stuff, because you also should be having time for yourself. And so you can end up falling into something that is very monogamous like, but only because of the time constraints or other constraints.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. But and yeah, socially in class, there are very big classist discussions on polyamory already out there, but it is totally a thing for sure. And again, I think that that's access to education. So that's another reason why I want to spark, because I don't know how many people are getting that information in the different classes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's probably less easy to access that information, for people who, I don't know, don't have access to college and therapists and other things in the same way that some of us are fortunate enough to.
Right, because right now the major narrative that's available to all is monogamous mindset.
Right.
I had to seek it out myself, and I had the means to be able to buy the books and drive to the meetups and all of that. But the internet has definitely helped that.
For sure.
We don't even put this language out into the regular world. So again, it's like you have to really fight for it or search for it or have the opportunity or the privilege to have been introduced to it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. I teach gender, sexuality, and women's studies. And in my class, I talk a lot about different relationship structures. And I think that's the thing that my students this semester were the most interested in. They wanted to know, wait, so what's the difference between a swinger and a poly person and somebody who's in BDSM and somebody who's a sex worker? And they actually were really interested in what all of those different configurations look like. Because I don't think for a lot of them, they'd never heard anyone break this down for them before.
Right.
I will say, though, like as a parent, I get a sense that at least in queer youth circles, a lot of this is becoming a growing topic of conversation and consideration. And
yeah, that's true.
Queer youth are thinking about these things even in like middle school, high school. So there's some ways in which it is moving deeper in society and even across classes. But again, that means having access to like, local LGBT groups or something where, you might have these conversations, and some folks in cities might be fortunate enough to have that, and some folks in rural areas or other places may not. So,
oh, absolutely.
For people who are interested in more resources about non-monogamy or about the work that you're doing, where can they find you?
My website is thegrowtharc.com. People can find me there. I'm on Twitter as @growtharc because someone already had the growth arc. I am on Instagram as the growth arc.
Okay.
Would you like to pump your other profiles as well?
Oh, yes. I also work with Shock Grubs and am a sex worker at Torma Celine on Twitter and Instagram. And then sometimes I model at Lady Rue as well.
Awesome. Thanks so much for talking to us. It was really nice to chat with you.
Yeah, I hope to talk to you again soon.
Yeah, us too. Thanks so much.
Bye.
Yep, bye.
Thank you for joining us for yet another episode of the Peep Show podcast. I'm PJ Sage, and you can find me on Twitter @PeachSage.
And I'm Jessie Sage, and you can find me on Twitter @sapiotextual or @jessiesage.com.
We would like to remind you that we have a Patreon account and would appreciate your support. Please visit patreon.com/peepshowpodcast. Our music is courtesy of Joe Kennedy. The show was produced by Jessie and PJ Sage.
Signing off. Have a great week.